Good afternoon and hello. Welcome to today's webinar, Simplifying Security Assessments for Oracle E-Business Suite. My name is Scott Lavery, and I am the VP of Marketing here at Pathlock. And before we begin, I just wanted to include a couple of housekeeping notes. First and foremost, everybody is on mute. Second, if you have any questions, you can certainly put those in the questions section of the control panel. We'll make sure to get to the Q&A at the end of the presentation. The presentation will be roughly 30 minutes. So that being said, I want to quickly introduce our speakers today. First and foremost, we'll be hearing from Mike Ward, who's the VP of GRC Systems here at Pathlock. And then we'll also be hearing from Preston Leftwich, who is a technical manager, and will be showing the Pathlock solution in more detail. So with that being said, I will now turn it over to Mike to begin today's presentation. Mike?
Thank you very much, Scott. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Sure can.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? Hello there, folks. So our webinar today is really about how to understand the risks and the problems on your EBS system. We've been doing this work with Oracle ERP systems for over 20 years, and my background basically is that I was installing accounting systems 40 years ago. So, and I've been responsible for a team of people who've done 400 or 500 audits of ERP systems. So that's my background. But Preston, do you want to just give the audience a little bit of knowledge of your background?
Thanks, Mike. So I've worked in the ERP sphere as a functional consultant for about 20 years or so, working in configuring systems to manage the processes and departments, and specifically over the last 5 or 6 years in the realm of security compliance and architectural security design. So I've been working here for the last 3 years now, helping clients sort of bridge the gap, understand what the possibilities are from a technology perspective, and then how to architect that solution to help meet your needs. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Preston. I told you could be succinct when you tried hard. One thing I did want to cover before we get into the subject matter today is that the name Pathlock might be new to some of you. My company was called Q Software. You'll see that there at the top. What we're doing here at Pathlock this year is bringing together 7 leading brands in the GRC arena and pulling them together into one worldwide leader in what we're calling ERP GRC. So the key issue here is that we've got a range of skills and products for Oracle and for SAP and for PeopleSoft, etc., as you see on the screen. And what we're working on now is bring those together into one single platform, which is actually launching with our customers next week. So the overall issue here is 2 things in my mind. One is to be able to offer controls across platforms. This is the big change in the environment today, that your company will have 20 or 30, maybe 60 different systems, and you need to be able to manage controls like SOD, provisioning, etc. across that one interface, one source of knowledge, and that's what we'll be focusing on over the next 12 months. But secondly, and to me most importantly, efficiency, by putting in sustainable controls, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So these are the 2 key areas in the EBS market that we are focusing on, what we term access government roles, compliant provisioning, etc. And then perhaps even more importantly, the enforcing controls by monitoring transactions, data masking, etc. Single sign-on, we now have a range of products for single sign-on and multi-factor authentication for EBS, so talk to us if we can help. But enough of the background. Let's get into the meat of it today. We're going to plan to spend about 35 minutes on this, so you can get on with the rest of your day. So our objectives really are to look at how you can identify your weaknesses in your ERP. What you don't want to be doing is the first you realize of the weaknesses in your security is that somebody hacks into it. All right, that you get problems with loss of data, you get problems with loss of system, etc. All right, you need to know this in advance. All right, And there could be different reasons for this. The two main reasons are that you want to plan for remediation or remove the weaknesses. But we also have customers who say to us, well, actually, these tools are good enough for us to manage our compliance and SOD with the tool set. So, but the third thing I wanted to mention today, and we'll cover it very briefly, is how to build a business case, because I feel that this is what many people in this kind of market struggle with, that they know they've got a problem, but they can't convince management to invest. All right? Well, a lot of the work we do now is not just identifying the weaknesses and showing the client where the weaknesses are and planning, helping them plan the remediation, but helping them to build a business case. So I'm going to touch on that as well today. So, but let's get on with it. I've been wittering enough, I think. So let's get into the core of the content. I'm going to give you a little bit of a background and then hand over to Preston for a while. But the core issue for me is how to manage your risks. What you need to understand is where your risks are. All right, where the problem areas in my systems. And as I said, it's not just your EBS system; it's all of your systems. And perhaps so these are the key areas that come to light most of the time. That you have problems that you are aware of around user provisioning, around SOD. But perhaps they only come out when you have a security audit. You know, if you are a company that's liable to for SOX, which is probably 60% of you, perhaps FDA, other compliance needs, requirements. What you don't want to be in this position is that the external auditor is the one that points these issues out to you. All right. What I do find, us looking at the list of attendees, I suspect all of you are IT rather than audit. And this phrase of internal controls is something that IT people don't relate to very well. What I'm here to tell you is that controls are the thing that can save your life in this area. Put in place controls that will last for the next 10 years. It will save you a lot of time and energy when it comes to things like audit reporting. B, it'll give you knowledge, understanding of what your risks are, so that you're ready when the auditor comes and you can say, here are the reports you need, Mr. Auditor, all right? And you can sleep at night knowing that your risks are under control. A couple of background pieces. If you weren't aware, you have around about a 1 in 2 chance of somebody committing fraud on your systems. All right, that's not just your EBS system, it's any of your internal systems. And around about half of those issues are going to be committed by insiders. The key issue here for me is that if you don't think you're going to have fraud, you're wrong. You almost certainly are going to have fraud on your systems over the next few years. And I'm not talking here about cybersecurity. I'm not talking about cyber hacking. I'm talking about your systems, probably in your data center or hosted in a private cloud somewhere. All right, you've got a huge risk that you need to address. And the biggest way out of those risks is to put in place internal controls. It's not just a matter of satisfying audit, it's satisfying common sense to put in controls which will stop these frauds from happening. So, you know, believe me, embracing internal controls is crucial. But moving forward, the biggest issue for me is that we are making our environments more and more complicated. You, as EBS users, will be moving forward and embracing the cloud. So either you're hosting your system. Sorry, I'm not supposed to say that anymore, am I? You're putting your system into a private cloud. Yeah, you're hosting it. And what you're probably doing is also surrounding your core EBS system with other cloud-based environments, all right? Whether it's Salesforce, whether it's Ariba, whether, you know, cloud systems. So you're making your environment more and more complicated, all right? And that complication increases risk, particularly because you don't necessarily have the skills. It's very difficult to pick up the skills. It's very difficult to employ people who understand them. Right? You need to rely a lot on third parties to have those skills. But the third issue is that we all have this problem. This CFO that's looking down on us saying, yeah, you keep asking for 10% per annum increase in IT costs. What you're having is a decrease in IT costs. and that increased risk. And what we need to be doing with our financial management associates, friends, colleagues, is offering them ways to understand the risks. And this is the core that we're going to go into in a moment, but also to enable them to build a business case to understand how to reduce that risk. But the third thing we need to be able to do is to offer efficiency. I put in place control systems, that processes which will reduce the costs around this area of controlling the ERP system and the risk around it. So I'll come back to that a little bit later on. But let's look at how we assess the security. All right? If you are the ERP director, these are the things that ought to be worrying you. You ought to look at all parts of your environment and say, well, what are my risks? All right? You need to do a risk assessment. All right? And in particular, when you focus down on your EBS system, you need to understand what the major frauds are. And are they possible? Can somebody commit the dummy company fraud on your EBS system? What is the dummy company fraud? Can somebody amend bank account details and pass through major payments to which are due to your suppliers to their accounts in the Cayman Islands? Are these frauds possible? And that's the whole point about running a risk assessment, is to look at this. And perhaps you'll have the world's tightest security, but if you run an assessment, you'll know that. What I have to tell you in passing is that 98% of the assessments we run indicate that major frauds are possible to some degree on all the audits that we've run. So the other thing that you can use this kind of assessment for is to satisfy audit. I don't think that's what you should be necessarily starting from. You should evaluate the risks for your own benefit first, and then for external audit. But then the two core issues: how to plan, having run assessment, what internal controls would help? How do I get them in? And how do I plan out all this work around remediation and in internal controls? But let me stop there and hand over to my friend Preston. Preston, take it.
Thanks, Mike. So conceptually, when we talk about security assessment, what we're trying to say is it's not just running an SOD check to determine that you have holes in your security. That's not the only goal we're trying to do. What we're trying to understand is where in your system those holes exist, and the underlying architecture that goes with that tells you where is there a process that you've identified that's okay to behave in a certain way, and that you've got then gaps that come from those stringing of gaps. It could be multiple roles together, it could be multiple menus together. EBS has got some complicated conversations when it comes around security, and understanding where the core starting point is part of how we start our assessments. So the idea is to decide, hey, do I need to even get into a redesign, or am I looking at something that I've assumed is proper in the way I should be doing things, and that redirection and re-architecture changes my solution in overall. Remediation, not just saying I need to change roles, but maybe how I change my process. Who handles those roles? Who manages that process within my company? That's another part of the conversation that's important, because it's not only just turning things on and off. It also deals with how the business performs every day. And then the other side of that is to actually understand what the rule is trying to check for, and looking for in the business process ways in which you not only prevent it from a application perspective, but systemically, how do you manage the processes, even if they're on paper, in part of your processing? How do you make sure that you identify those gaps? And so those three things sort of wrap us around what we're trying to get to when we do an actual assessment. We'll go to the next one, Mike. There we go. So the actual assessment process for us starts with an installation of an agent that we put on your machine. It actually pulls the audit data. The data itself is defaulted in EBS. We run an extraction of rules and users. No personal data is taken in that process. We just look at the actual applications that have access and the structure that's behind that as well. We then take our time to, our assessment team goes through the data, not only looks for the triggers and the matrix of complicated SOD checking that's there, but also goes in and looks for the things that might have slipped through the cracks that aren't actually programmatically identifiable based on what they know. And at that point, we bring back to you as a client the presentation of the results. We review those results with you, explain sort of how the packages have been built for you. We deliver that package in a bundle to you in documentation along with the presentation. And then we give you an opportunity to review what we suggest with a plan in place and some of the suggestions on what you need to address first, your hierarchy of priorities, if you will. And then at the end of that, we also provide support on the back end to help you further clarify any details that you might have or talk about your business specific data that you have out there, so we can help you make the case for building a project to hopefully take care of any gaps in your process. From an actual overview, the rating system that we use, we follow sort of a model versus user ID. The idea being that on the model side, where do you have access controls in place? Have you got everything wide open and everybody can do everything? How many records do you have? And then how does that cause a problem in trying to sort through and efficiently manage your data? How many roles do your employees have, and what those roles mean and how they've been structured? And then also, who has elevated access? All of us on IT love to have access to everything, but the trend more and more, and I've done this for the last 3 years, really is to build out that IT role that lets you view and identify and troubleshoot, but not actually transactionally work with everything out in the system. And then down at the user level, right, who has access to do major changes to the system, update financial systems, update customer values, those kinds of things. And then making sure that there's integrity in those user identifications, because it's not any good for Bob to share his user ID with 16 people and everybody that does their work does it under Bob, and no one really knows which one of Bob's coworkers does the work. So all of that goes into our scaling process, in which we then come back and kind of rate you somewhere between poor and good. And we talk about anywhere that there happens to be process improvement, we will bring that to bear as well. From a critical access, we identify the places that give you access to the system. I'll talk about that here in a minute when we talk about the web version of this process. That's the starting point, the kickoff point for this. But the critical access really deals with, it's not an SOD violation, it's understanding who has control over single point of entry, single penetration into your company that makes a difference. Things that change the way your system works, that changes how your financials work or how they're being displayed on the system. Things that can impact the way processing happens in general is kind of what we call critical access. And that's a catalog process, because it's important when something changes in that line of business that I have 10 people that can have access to that, and I need to pull all 10 of them in. Because even if it's an accident, you still need to change and redirect that process back amongst the group to say, this isn't the way to handle this, we need to move it in a different direction. So whether it's identifying fraud or simply identifying process improvement opportunity, it becomes valuable data. And then we talk about the segregation of duty side of things, which is the actual processing of putting multiple applications into a grouping of activities, labeling that group and calling it, for example, the creating of a customer record. There's 19 ways to skin a cat, different ways to create that record in the system. It's not just one program. You can get there through multiple different ways. And knowing and understanding that those programs create customers gives us the ability to silo the creation of a customer and then coming back and talking about actually creating that payment voucher for that customer. There's lots of different ways to do that as well. So we combine those two into two different groups. We identify them, we merge them, and then we look for conflict where there's the ability to do both of those activities by getting access to one or more of those applications. And then we talk about we give you a summary overview. How many people have violated that particular rule? How many of those are based on business users, so that we're looking at transactional violations, and those that are in IT, because a lot of companies tend to put IT in a position where their processes are overlooked and managed in a different way. And so we tend to put that group to the side and we focus on that middle piece. And then as the risk is identified, medium, low, and high, we then come across and identify the first grouping that you'll need to identify and work on how that process happens. Is it something that you can get around from removing simply groups of application access? Or do you need to change the way your businesses work? Do you need to segregate process between two different members in the same business unit? And then at the next part, we'll get into the demo piece. So let's see, I will take control of the screen for you, Mike. And let's see.
There you go, Preston.
There we go. Thank you very much. You let me know that you can see my screen, please, sir.
I can see it fine.
Great. So the actual way that we start with this is that first step in our segregation of duties run that we do, that software that we put on it pulls those reporting out of EBS. We load those into our cloud where they run overnight, depending on the size of your organization. And then they come back and give us the metrics at the beginning. And one of those metrics that it gives us at the very beginning is things like how many active users do we have in the system, how many are inactive. I have worked dozens of these over the last few years. And in those conversations, this number always startles people because they're like, there's no way we have that many people. And it's because there's the first win, right? To go in and true up the number of active users based on what you think you have in your system. Investigate, go get the data, figure out what's going on there. Number of responsibilities per user, active responsibility counts. These are all metrics that give you kind of the pulse of how your system's configured so that you can have an idea if you run this process over and over again, you can trend the numbers to be more accurate based on what you expect them to be. If you're not expecting responsibilities to be this high based on the number of users that you have in your system, then as you true those things up and you bring your user counts down and you clean up your responsibilities, then you can prove that you've worked forward from a point in time and move things back down the system. One of the things is that all of these records identify hyperlinks in the system, and so they'll actually jump out here and show you the policies that are the big wins and the big violators, if you will, in the system. Along with these, all showing the actual active records and the employees that are within the grouping as well. Again, user IDs only. We're not dealing with actual employee names. And then we break the data down within the violations category into two different groups, one by rule and one by user. And the reason we do that is because rules that are high risk, rules that manage to create immediate violation, no matter who you deal with, from an internal auditor or an external auditor, no matter who those people are, they're going to come back to you and say, you cannot have somebody create a PO and a PO receipt. That's just not going to fly. It breaks SOD. That's not going to happen. If you do that, what you can see here is that the rule is the important part, and here are all the people that are in with that rule as well. And if you click on the detail of each one of these, you'll get a risk and recommendation, which is completely customizable by your group, or we can assist you in creating those recommendations as you work with the product. And then it also starts to get into the actual structure in the system. And working with EBS people for the last 3 years, what I've come to understand is this is where our big win is, because it's not just the menus and the structure, but it's the responsibility management part that a lot of us don't necessarily have understanding of at the EBS level out of the box. Because what happens is Oracle sends all of those out of the box. And the number that is in there that can perform a particular function in the system, those are massive. And so giving you the data so that you understand where those responsibilities fit into what functions and how that rolls up into a role, that right there is what I have learned is the most valuable for people working in security. And that goes back to the idea that these rules are extremely important if you're looking at the ones that the company internal audit or the external auditors are going to come back and say to you and say, hey, we can't do that. You can't manage creating an order and shipping the order out of the system. That doesn't fall in place. Now I can look at just those people, and I can look at all of those particular organizational pieces that are out here, and I get all of the responsibility hierarchy, and I get down to the actual object in there that tells me this object is going to cause me a problem. And that level of detail means that now I can check every different group of role and responsibility for these particular functions, and I can deal with the security as it sits within this policy. Now, the idea behind that is this is a policy that's in violation because all of these people do that. They do it for different reasons. Some of them have different roles assigned. Some of them have different responsibilities. Those functions fall into different menus. All of that's taken into account, and it allows us on the application. I have lots of clients that use this monthly, run it, clear themselves of any SOD after they have a clean slate, and run it a proof of positive to their auditors every month that says we've not violated anything since the last month. In the event that that process happens and there's a reason for it, we offer an opportunity to mitigate that risk so that you can actually document within the system the mitigation by identifying a reason for it. Someone's out of town, persons are moving around in the company, things change, and you can actually set an expiration date with that so that the next time this mitigation is run, it checks to see, is this person still in a mitigating situation, or have they been moved off, and if it violates now I need to flag it again. That lets that timing, that documentation, that archival relationship exist for auditors if they want to check on how you manage your system. This does not penetrate back into EBS. There is no forward movement of the data. This stays in our cloud and is workable as a project data from our side. We don't actually inject it back into the EBS side. But from a rule side, the other way we pivot the data, same rule set, right, is we come back and look at the user. Because now we get that inventory of our IT users and we say, our IT users, yes, we understand that these three things are in violation, but you know what? They're in IT, that's their job. We can mitigate right off the bat. And now the policy stays in play, but the person's been exempted from having to deal with that segregation of duties, if you will. And all of those things combined give you a way to quickly pare down, either by user or by policy, the ones that are important right off the bat, and clean them up very, very quickly, as opposed to having to go through each one of those, now run reports on base 2 as those user roles, now pull those roles out of the system and try and figure out which objects within that function group cause that problem. So that seems to be the big win as far as how the system works in our side. One of the other pieces that we provide back to that single risk concept is people who actually have the ability to create journal entries. Again, not an SOD violation, as it were, but more of a cataloging of how many people on my system have access to create journal entries. And that's a lot of people, right? 130, 40 people have access. I better make sure that that's accurate. It gives me that checkpoint, that gut check that a lot of us have working in IT. And then as you create mitigations and work with them, we actually segregate those mitigations out here on the side, and they'll inventory here. Same reason, for audit purposes, so that they can come along and look and see that you've actually made that mitigation and your documentation correlates with that as well. We then provide all of that data that I just showed you in Excel spreadsheets that becomes workable project work. That data you can pull down, organize, and set up on the sidelines so that you can work with the data. There's also a PDF report that works with that data. And what that allows us to do from a PDF perspective is a point in time, uneditable, audit-worthy document that can't be changed. And then that manages to provide us with the data that you can have as you trend towards a clean slate. You can continue to prove that. And additionally, within the supporting document side, we provide some cloud space to document, to put in links to have sign-offs, email chains, if you will, about the types of mitigations that you do and the workflow approval, if you will. So with all of that, that's kind of everything in a nutshell. This becomes the core of what we do with our assessment, and our assessment comes afterwards, where we take all of the raw data and do a more microscopic look at what's going on in your system. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you, Preston. And I think that was a good explanation of the system. But what I want to do before we close things up, and I'm going to take this in a hurry because as usual, Preston's taking a little bit more time than expected, is have a look at how you would take the information. What we aim to do, as Preston explained, is to give you this risk-based information. Here are your risks. We build it into a PowerPoint for you, and we anticipate that we would present that PowerPoint back with the IT team to the business. And what that's going to show is where the problems are, and the final slides would be about building a plan. All right, here is a plan of how you can sort those issues out. But the key issue when we started doing this, I think 4 years ago, I think, was that companies were struggling to understand how to turn this into a project, how to build a business case. And so we've developed a methodology now to enable us to work with you to build a business case, to sell the solution, the project plan, and therefore the costs to the powers that be. These issues that we're talking about are business issues. We, and once more, I'm assuming you're all in IT, we are here to provide information, help, guidance, training, tools, etc. But the issues are business issues. And the core is how to actually explain that to it. And I'm not going to go into vast details, but this is the 5-stage business case that we would normally produce with you. All right, looking at the risks, looking at the costs and savings. Always got to put some savings in. Look at the implementation plan, dependencies, but the core being how to communicate this and how to measure it. All right. To be able to do this, you've got to identify your stakeholders. Who is it within your organization that is affected? Right? It's certainly the CFO. It's certainly a financial controller. Who in the business is in the situation where if something goes wrong, they will be affected. All right? And I like to use a RASI type stakeholder identification scheme. All right, and it's really well worth doing that, because what you need to do is to identify those people who need to be influenced, who need to be informed, who need to be sold to. All right? The key benefit to the finance team is, generally speaking, not the fact that they're going to keep their jobs because they aren't going to have any fraud on their system, though they ought to consider that. The main thing that they do take into account is any cost savings. And from our years of doing this, we can see typically there are savings in particular areas. I will point you at the periodic access review, user certification, some people call it, as a way that you can get a quick win. Implement a control around user certification. It almost always pays for itself. All right, it should pay for itself if you're running that certification every half year or every quarter year. It should pay for itself in a year. All right, but you can also get major savings out of the other areas, which will vary depending on your business. And obviously, those are the things that would help you go through and understand. The final area, however, is the soft benefits. I quite like this slide. It's a bit overcomplicated, but it shows the average value of frauds. And, all right, the problem with it, the soft benefits are that many people just don't believe it. All right? I can give you endless slides and endless reports about this from PwC I referred to earlier on, etc. This is extremely common. All right, but some companies will take into effect these soft benefits, and you need to include them in the business case. So that's about all I wanted to say about that. If you've got any questions, please key them into the chat box and the question box, and we'll pick those up in a couple of minutes' time. So I just wanted to summarize. First of all, I wanted to just itemize to you a couple of things about what we are now providing to our clients in other areas. Particularly, we now have on the Pathlock security platform, single sign-on for EBS, including multi-factor authentication. It is available and deliverable today, so talk to us. We've got a webinar coming on about that. And also dynamic data masking, all right? To be able to mask data based on considerations, local considerations, to be able to check somebody coming in from an IP address. Perhaps they've gone to the rather than working from home on a fixed IP address, they've gone to Starbucks. You then want to actually mask out the data and not show certain data, and we now have tools to enable that. It's not for everybody across the EBS environment. We also have a full range now to satisfy GRC, so user lifecycle management, audit and SOD controls I've talked about, and RBAC I've talked about as well. So what are our objectives? Our objectives here are really about providing efficiency, and that's achieved through automation. People, I did a presentation at the Oracle User Group in Las Vegas earlier on a couple of months ago, which is about futures. Right? And the core issue that I keep saying over and over again is automation, automation, automation. Yes, we can get smarter about some of that automation. We now have tools that will look at your usage within your organization and analyze your roles and provide suggestions of how you can improve those roles. All right? That's where you're going to actually get not only more control, but reduce costs. Absolutely crucial. All right? But the other side of the equation is to be able to then put in place means to control these, automate these controls, a workflow that will enable you to put in place process control. And as I said earlier on, this is not just in terms of your EBS system, but other systems as well going forward. So I always like to finish on some tips and tricks. You know, we've had a lot of experience of this, so we might know a little bit about it. But I always find that some people disagree and want a different set. But hey, it's a good start. Issue number one for me always is if you're responsible for the EBS system, you want to know whether there are risks or not. Perhaps you feel that your security is tight as a nut and you don't have any risks, but it's best to know, all right? Because in our experience, it isn't. And the way to do that is to run an audit or run an assessment, as we tend to call them these days. But to be able to actually really understand that and the results of that, I think it was clear in the way that Preston explained it. You got to know your business processes. It's all about understanding how those business processes stretch across your environment, and therefore you can look at segregation of duties properly and look at risk properly. And now those business processes unfortunately stretch across multiple platforms. All right? What the environment shows us at the moment is that probably over half of you have got a separate purchasing system. All right? So perhaps you use EBS for your accounting, and perhaps you're using Ariba for your purchasing environment. All right? So there are business processes that spread over those two systems. And how do you analyze risk, segregation of duties across those two systems? All right? And that is certainly the area that we want to help you with now. You need to plan your roles or your privileges, responsibilities. In most of you will be using responsibilities rather than roles. Same issue. You want to plan your roles such that you are executing least privilege. What does that mean? It means that nobody should have access to any part of the system unless they need it to do their job. The phrase "I'd like access" should never be taken any notice of. But the core to this, I hope you've understood, is understanding your controls. Get in place good controls which will map across your environment. All right? User provisioning, segregation of duties, user deprovisioning. You know, these are the controls that are desperately important. And if you put them in once and make them work, you know, then you will save money and reduce risk. Build a risk matrix. And it's very, very important. I can give you a risk matrix. You can download them off the internet, amazingly enough, but you've got to work on it. It's got to be your risk matrix. Your business processes will be slightly different. And as you're working through it, you've got to make sure that that part of the business where that risk rule is applied, that the business understands it. All right? And therefore, the core issue is to empower the business by giving them the information. Proper controls around user certification, empower the business to understand their access. But issue number one, the most important issue is automation. Automate your controls so that you can put them in today, all right, as part of this process, and understand that they will still be providing you with the control and the information you need in 10 years' time without further investment. So that really is the nub of our session today. Have we got any questions, Scott?
Sure. And want to remind everybody, if you have any questions to add, you can certainly put those in the questions section of the control panel. Let me peruse here. I think this is specifically for the risk assessment portion, and that's what is the price, or yeah, what is the price of the risk assessment service?
All right, tell me afterwards who that was that asked that question, Scott. I like that one. We currently sell the assessment for between $7,000 and $10,000, depending on the size of the task. Obviously, if you've got more users, it'll be more complicated. Secondly, if you want to tailor the SOD rules, it'd be more complicated. But that $10,000, and normally it's a 1 month process. I mean, it only takes us a couple of days to do it, but we like some lead time, etc. And we always insist that we agree the criteria up front with you. But if you went to one of the big four for such a enterprise, it'll cost you upwards of $40,000. And I'll give you a clue: they don't actually have the access and understanding of the same information as we do.
Okay, so I think this one's related. What's the actual output or deliverable that you get from a risk assessment?
Okay, good question. And we do have some samples. If you're particularly interested, let me know and I'll set up a call, and Preston or one of the others can walk you through it. And the core deliverable is two things. One is a risk analysis, and I think Preston touched on that well earlier on. Where are my SOD risks? Where are my single program risks, etc. But the second and perhaps more important thing is a plan. Effectively an outline project plan of how to improve those issues, how to put in controls around those issues, etc. But Preston can walk you through that. Let us know.
Good deal. Okay. And last but not least, I think this is SOD related. Are you able to do SOD checks across additional systems, say SAP?
Well, there you go. That's a good question. Yes, we are just in the final stages of testing out this assessment process for SOD, for SAP. And that will be a deliverable next month. All right. So we will then have the assessment process available for EBS, JD Edwards, Oracle ERP Cloud, all right, and SAP next month, and PeopleSoft the end of next month. All right. So, but by the end of the year, our objective is to be able to offer this as a cross-platform, all right, deliverable. That'll take us a little bit longer, perhaps into Q4, to be able to analyze those cross-platform risks we talked about earlier on.
Okay. Well, very good. Any final thoughts, Mike?
No, that was a good session. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm sorry we ran a little bit long. I'm going to blame it all on Preston, but I think he did a good job there of describing it for you. To me, it's simple. If I'm the man that's responsible for security, or woman responsible for security on my EBS ERP system, I would want to know whether somebody can commit fraud. And you know, the figures show you got a 1 in 2 chance. So, and if somebody does commit fraud, you're in the firing line. All right. But with this process, what we're aiming to do is to make the other side of this easier, i.e., to explain to senior management, all right, the business, the stakeholders, where the problems are, and help you build a business case so that they can get over this core issue, which we come across time and time again of the CFO saying, no, it's not my top priority. All right. This is how you make it the top priority, partially by scaring them, but more importantly by giving them a plan that includes cost savings, etc. But that's all we've got for today. But Scott, thank you for organising. Thank you for everybody for coming along. I think we've got one more slide. The next 2 webinars are on single sign-on and dynamic data masking. So look on our website, or I'm sure you'll get an invite from us. But thank you for your time today, folks. That's my email address. Let me know thoughts if you enjoyed it, or if you hated it, or you disagreed with it. But thanks for your time today.
Yep. Thank you, everybody, and just want to remind everyone on the call that we will be sending out a recording of the webinar after today. It should be within the next couple days. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you in another PathLog webinar soon. Have a great day.